Hi, my name is Genevieve, and I will be talking about the benefits of institutional self-deception. Okay, so a great deal of philosophical work has argued for seeing certain groups as agents, capable of beliefs and desires, and as able to make assertions and to lie. Recently, it has also been suggested that self-deception is something that affects institutions as well as individuals. I wish to take such suggestions seriously and assess the degree to which we should be concerned about self-deceived institutions. It has been widely assumed that suffering from self-deception is a negative thing. It can often make us unaware of certain truths or blind us to our own moral shortcomings, and so can prevent us from addressing such problems and defects. Given that institutions can wield a great deal of political, social, and economic power, if institutions are capable of self-deception, there is room for things to go awry on a very large scale with potentially dire consequences. However, there is also a great deal of influential literature in psychology which suggests that self-deception may actually be extremely beneficial, that harboring self-deceptive beliefs can, quote, contribute to the production of better mood, better popularity, better ability to care for others, creativity, productivity, resilience from stress, and ultimately happiness, end quote, albeit if kept within certain healthy limits. I begin by drawing a distinction between lying to oneself and self-deception, and claim that institutions are susceptible to both. I will then suggest that self-deception needn't be a bad thing. It can clearly be beneficial to institutions as well as individuals, and this fact may serve to change our attitude towards the discovery of institutional self-deception. On the other hand, I will argue that an institution lying to itself is something to be avoided. Okay, so the terms self-deception and lying to oneself are often used interchangeably or understood in terms of one another. For example, Raphael Demos explicitly states that self-deception exists when a person lies to himself. Yet, as many have noted, if one attempts to model self-deception on cases of interpersonal deception, this gives rise to a number of paradoxes. In order for someone to be self-deceived, they must take on the role of both the deceiver and the deceived. Thus, someone ought to be aware of the truth about something in order to be able to lie about it, but they must also fail to know the truth in order to be taken in by the lie. So there have been attempts to resolve these paradoxes while holding on to the view of self-deception as involving intentionally lying to oneself, by introducing notions of temporal or psychological partitioning. Yet these attempts have been criticized for either failing to cover a wide enough range of cases we would ordinarily count as instances of self-deception, or for introducing further puzzles of their own. As a result, a number of theorists have concluded that self-deception is an impossibility. In order to hold on to the notion of self-deception, recent philosophical work on self-deception has tended to adopt a deflationary approach to the phenomenon. Alfred Mealy, for example, argues instead that self-deception involves having only one false belief. This false belief is supported by unconscious desires or emotions and motivationally biased evidence gathering. As a consequence, even in the face of evidence to the contrary, by selectively attending to their surroundings, a person may come to believe P given their own desire for P to be true. This gives rise to a situation in which the subject will not literally have to juggle two incompatible beliefs, P and not P. They just have access to evidence which ought to believe them to believe not P instead of P. With the above in mind, it may be possible to draw a distinction between self-deception, understood in deflationary terms, and lying to oneself. While individuals may be virtually incapable of lying to themselves, they may well be capable of self-deception. However, institutions look like the kind of entities that could, literally, lie to themselves. As they are made up of a number of individuals, one individual or sector of an institution could quite easily lie to another individual or sector of that institution. I have argued elsewhere that institutions are also capable of being self-deceived, understood in deflationary terms, i.e., they can have false beliefs which are supported by their desires and by motivationally biased evidence gathering, where evidence available to the institution outweighs this belief. So some people have argued that there are nevertheless benefits to self-deception. So in response to the view that accurate perceptions of oneself and the world are essential elements of mental health, Shelley Taylor and Jonathan Brown conducted and reviewed a great deal of research which supports the opposing view, that harboring self-deceptive beliefs can contribute to psychological well-being by helping to improve one's mood and boost one's self-esteem, which can in turn contribute to things like increased popularity, better relationships, and even a greater capability for caring for others. Additionally, such positive illusions tend to increase one's motivation, persistence, productivity, and even creativity, and help one to cope better with stressful situations. Taylor even notes that, quote, positive illusions help to create and maintain happiness, end quote. In fact, contrary to the suggestion that self-deception is pathological, Taylor has argued that, quote, in many ways, the healthy mind is a self-deceptive one, end quote. Taylor and Brown do not draw the distinction that I have between lying to oneself and self-deception. I assume here that they are referring to self-deception as opposed to lying to oneself when they talk about the benefits of self-deception. However, institutions are not only capable of similar beneficial self-deceptions, they are also able to bring about similar positive results by lying to themselves. So, for example, whether due to motivationally biased evidence gathering or because the finance division deliberately fudged the numbers and misled the board of directors, an institution which regards itself as more successful than it really is could be more inclined to show care towards others, perhaps by initiating certain charitable projects. An overinflated view of its own abilities could also lead an institution to being more motivated and persistent, and so actually more productive in its chosen endeavors. An unrealistic positive outlook could also help institutions deal with stressful situations. So, for example, it could help them see the closure of a branch as an opportunity to focus on or improve X or Y or Z, as opposed to a threat to their survival. If we think that an increase in charity, productivity, or resilience is beneficial to institutions, we should perhaps see institutional self-deception, or an institution's lying to itself, as not necessarily such a bad thing. But despite the apparent advantages of self-deception or lying to oneself, many have persisted in suggesting that it is ultimately costly in the long run, and that fostering an honest appraisal of oneself and one's situation is actually the better route to achieving mental health and happiness. For example, in experiments where participants were given the opportunity to cheat on a general knowledge test, those who cheated often resorted to self-deception. So they attributed their high scores to their own high levels of intelligence rather than to the fact that they cheated. Even though there are benefits to self-deception in the short term, one doesn't have to feel bad about one's own moral shortcomings, these self-deceptive beliefs proved costly in the long run. Compared with participants who did not cheat, self-deceived cheaters failed to accurately predict how well they'd do in further tests, drastically overestimating their scores, even when there was a monetary incentive for accurate prediction. Similarly, if an expanding business had an unjustifiably positive view of itself, attributing success to itself as opposed to the fact that its competitors in the area just closed down, for example, it may fail to predict how well it would do in a new market or a different side of town. In terms of self-deceptive beliefs making one feel better about oneself, and so increasing motivation and resilience, etc., Van Leuven argues that without a genuine correlation between this belief and the world, any outcomes that result from such beliefs will be temporary, as reality will intervene. Van Leuven even suggests that the disappointment of not having one's expectations met could be even greater if a person had simply had an accurate view of themselves, and so realistic expectations to begin with. The same could be said for institutions. So if a restaurant has the self-deceptive belief that, say, its decor is particularly appealing, much nicer than that of its competitors, they will likely be disappointed when they are not treated as having particularly appealing decor. So when customers leave reviews stating the opposite, or choose to go elsewhere instead as a result. Given the initial self-deceptive belief in this regard, this could be a particularly damaging blow for the restaurant. Van Leuven also tackles the suggestion that self-deception can helpfully lead one to pursue goals one would not otherwise pursue, arguing that if one acts on false beliefs, one is likely to end up dissatisfied. Again, one can see how this could apply to institutional self-deception too. If a business thinks it is more efficient than it really is, this may spur it on to accept more jobs than it should. If the business fails to complete all the jobs it agreed to do, this will cause reputational damage and could affect the business so adversely that it ends up losing customers or even going out of business. Yet Taylor and Brown do note that, quote, optimistic self-appraisals of capability that are not unduly disparate from what is possible can be advantageous, whereas veridical judgments can be self-limiting, end quote. Thus, there is an argument to be made for the suggestion that self-deception can be extremely beneficial, albeit if kept within certain healthy limits. If one is severely self-deceived, it could easily lead to gross miscalculation and so thwart one's pursuits. Yet, as Julie Kirshner reiterates, when it comes to minor self-deceptions, quote, it is rarely the case that such inaccurate self-knowledge has punishing or fatal results, end quote. Again, it is plausible that this would be true of many institutions as well. In certain instances, a little self-deception may sometimes be as necessary a tool as a crowbar. If one continues with the thought that self-deception is in fact a marker of mental health, for certain institutions, a lack of self-deception could lead to more than depression. It could lead to dissolution. For example, it is well documented that the success rates of small businesses are very slim. If they did not, perhaps unjustifiably, subscribe to an optimistic outlook, then a small business may call it quits before they even begin, or may call it quits when the going inevitably gets tough. A little self-deception may arguably be just what's needed to persevere, and in doing so, increase their chances of success. Insofar as we value the continued existence of small businesses, say, then perhaps we should not be so quick to wholly eliminate institutional self-deception. To return to the distinction between lying to oneself and self-deception, lying to oneself has additional costs that may outweigh the benefits so far discussed. For a start, there is undoubtedly some difficulty involved in accurately predicting the results of a lie. So, as well-intentioned as the lie may be, lying to oneself could have unwelcome, unintended consequences. There is also the extra cognitive load involved in maintaining the lie, which could adversely affect focus and productivity within institutions that are lying to themselves, as well as the loss of trust that would occur if the lie were detected, and the damage to the reputation of the lying sector within the institution, or even the damage to the reputation of the entire institution to consider. These are costs that don't seem to apply in cases of unintentional institutional self-deception, if the self-deception is minor. So to conclude, as a consequence, Limited self-deception could be as positive for institutions as theorists like Taylor suggest it is for individuals. However, given the additional burden and potentially negative results of lying to oneself, this is something that institutions would do well to avoid. Thank you.